The contraction hit Kaylor Vance 6 steps from the hospital entrance. Not a warning. A full stop. His knees buckled. His hands slammed against the glass door frame, fingers white-knuckling the metal edge while his vision tilted sideways. The automatic doors slid open anyway, cold hospital air rushing out like the building was exhaling. And he stumbled in, half-bent, one hand pressed hard against the curve of his stomach. Nobody rushed over. That was the first thing he noticed. 3 nurses stood at the front desk. All of them looked up. All of them looked away just as fast. That's what it was like here. Mercy Pinnacle Hospital. Marble floors. Recessed lighting. The kind of quiet that costs money. And Omegas, especially ones who arrived alone, no appointment, no escort, no name on any preferred patient list, didn't exactly get the red carpet. Kaylor straightened as much as he could and moved toward the desk anyway. Each step was controlled, deliberate. He had spent the last 8 months making sure nothing about him looked desperate. He wasn't about to let a contraction change that now. "I need to be admitted," he said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. "Active labor." The intake nurse, young, neat hair, eyes that clocked him once and calculated something, reached for a clipboard without urgency. "Name, Kaylor Vance." A beat. Then the nurse typed something, frowned at the screen, typed again. "Do you have a referral on file or—" Another contraction. This one didn't ask permission. It came in low and hard, radiating from his lower back through his entire core, and Kaylor's hand flew to the desk edge. A sharp breath. 2 seconds of silence where he couldn't form a word. Hi viewers, if you or someone you know has ever had to fight to be taken seriously in a medical setting, drop a word in the comments. Just one word. Let me know you're here. The clipboard clattered. Not from the nurse. From someone moving fast on the other side of the desk. Hey, look at me." Different voice. Firmer. Closer. A man in blue scrubs appeared at his side, one hand already on his shoulder. Steadying, grounding, professional. His name tag caught the light. Riven Hale. "Walk with me," Riven said, not asking. "I'm fine," Kaylor started. "You're not." He was already steering Kaylor away from the desk, away from the clipboard, away from the intake nurse who had gone strangely quiet. "I need you seated. Right now. I just need a room." "You'll get one." Riven's hand tightened slightly on his shoulder. Not rough, just certain. His other hand was on his phone, screen angled away from Kaylor's line of sight. "First you sit." Kaylor let himself be moved. Not because he trusted the nurse yet, but because his legs were making the decision for him. They reached a row of chairs near the corridor wall. Riven eased him down, crouched in front of him, checked his pulse at the wrist with practiced efficiency. His eyes moved fast, clinical at first, scanning, assessing. Then something shifted. His hands stilled. His eyes lifted. Not panic. Not curiosity. Recognition. The kind that made Kaylor's stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with labor. "When did contractions start?" Riven asked. Carefully. Too carefully. "About 40 minutes ago." "They're close." Riven nodded slowly. He was still holding the phone. The screen had been glowing the whole time. "Is there someone we should call?" Riven asked. "Family. Partner. Anyone." "No." One word. Clean. Final. Riven looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. Then he stood, turned slightly away, and raised the phone to his ear. His voice dropped low. Too low. Kaylor caught 3 words. Just 3. Confirmed. "It's him." The air in the corridor didn't change. The lights stayed the same. The marble floor didn't move. But something shifted. The intake nurse behind the desk had stopped typing. A second staff member near the elevator had gone completely still. A third, an orderly who had been pushing a cart, turned around and walked the other direction without a word. Kaylor looked at Riven's back. then at the corridor ahead, then at his own hands, pressed flat against his stomach. They're already on their way. He had heard it, quiet, almost swallowed by the ambient hospital noise. But he had heard it. Who? He asked. Riven turned back around. His expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that people practiced. You should focus on your breathing. Who is already on their way? Riven opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes moved just briefly to the far end of the corridor. And that's when Kaler heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just footsteps, measured. Even, the kind that didn't speed up or slow down for anything. 3 men appeared first. Suits too pressed for a hospital at this hour. Eyes forward, moving like they owned the floor plan. And then behind them one more, taller, slower, like he had nowhere to be and everywhere at once. Kaler's breath stopped, not from pain, from recognition. The man's name was Valer Drace, and the last time Kaler had seen that face, he had been running from it. Comment below. Did you expect him to show up this fast? Because Kaler definitely didn't. Drop your reaction. Valer didn't rush. That was the thing nobody understood about him. Other powerful men entered rooms. Valer occupied them. There was a difference, and every person in that corridor felt it the second he crossed through the main entrance. 3 men flanking him, shoes barely making sound on the marble. The intake nurse at the front desk stood up straighter. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe visibly. The orderly who had turned around earlier kept walking, faster now. Riven stepped to the side. Not dramatically. Not with wide eyes or stumbling feet. He simply moved, like a tree that understood wind direction. Valer walked the length of the corridor without looking left or right. His eyes were fixed ahead, calm, dark, completely unreadable, until he stopped, right in front of Kaler, and looked down. Kaler didn't stand, couldn't, not with the last contraction still echoing through his lower back. So he sat in that chair and looked up, jaw tight, refusing to let his face say anything his mouth hadn't agreed to yet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Valer's gaze moved, slowly, from Kaler's face to his shoulder, to the hand still pressed against his stomach. Something crossed his expression, gone before it fully arrived. Mr. Drace, Riven said quietly, from several feet away. He's in active labor. We need to. I know what he needs. Riven went silent. One of the suited men stepped forward and murmured something near Valer's ear. Valer didn't turn his head, just gave a single, short nod. Within 30 seconds, 3 staff members had appeared from a hallway that hadn't shown any movement before. A wheelchair materialized. Someone was speaking quietly into a headset. A door at the far end of the corridor, the one marked private wing, level access required, clicked open without anyone visibly pressing anything. No announcement, no commotion, just systems responding to a name. Kaler watched all of it and felt something cold move through him that wasn't pain. I didn't call you, he said. His voice came out flat, steady. He made sure of it. Valer looked at him again. No. You didn't. Then why are you here? A pause. Not uncomfortable. Not hesitant. The pause of a man who chose his words the way other men chose weapons. Because the hospital called me, Valer said simply. Kaler blinked. The hospital doesn't have your. They do. That landed wrong. Or maybe it landed exactly right, which was worse. Kaler turned it over quickly. This hospital. Private wing access. Staff who went quiet at a nod. A nurse who had said it's him before Valer walked through the door. His intake had triggered something. His name. His scan. Something in his file that he hadn't put there, or maybe hadn't known was there. They're already on their way. Riven had said it before Valer arrived. Not after. Before. Which meant, the moment Kaler had walked through those doors, someone already knew. I need to speak with someone about my records, Kaler said carefully. You will. Vaylor stepped back slightly, creating space, not retreating, just allowing. After. I didn't agree to. Another contraction. This one was different. Deeper. The kind that doesn't leave room for arguments or dignity or carefully chosen words. Kaler's breath came out in a sharp, involuntary sound, and he leaned forward hard, and his hand reached out without him telling it to found Vaylor's forearm. Grabbed. Held. Vaylor went completely still. Not pulling away. Not reacting outwardly. Just still, the way something goes still when it's trying not to break the moment. Kaler's grip tightened for 3 full seconds. Then the contraction passed. He let go immediately, pulled his hand back, looked away. Prepare the room, Vaylor said. Quiet. No variation in tone. But every person within earshot moved. Kaler stared at the floor and thought about everything he had done over the last 8 months to make sure this moment never happened. Every careful step. Every city he hadn't stayed in too long. Every name he hadn't given to the wrong person. It hadn't been enough. Not because he'd made a mistake, but because somewhere inside this hospital system, in some file, some flagged marker, some access list he'd never consented to, his name had already been connected to a man he'd spent months pretending he didn't know. The wheelchair arrived. Riven stepped forward, professional and quiet. And as Kaler was eased into it, he caught a glimpse of the front desk monitor. The one the intake nurse had been staring at when she went still. The screen had been cleared. His intake record gone. Not filed. Not moved. Erased. Before he could process what that meant, the door to the private wing opened wider, and the wheelchair began to move. And somewhere behind him, Vaylor followed. Not rushing. Never rushing. Like he had always known this is where the night would end. Kaler thought he came in as a patient. But the moment that record disappeared, he realized something else entirely. He hadn't been admitted. He had been flagged. The room was too quiet. Private wing. End of the hall. The kind of hospital room that didn't look like a hospital room. Soft lighting, no exposed equipment, a window that showed nothing but dark sky and city lights blurred by glass. Kaler sat on the edge of the bed and breathed. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. 8 months of practice. He knew the rhythm now. Knew how to move through pain without letting his face give it everything. Riven had stepped out 2 minutes ago. Vitals checked. Monitors attached, professional efficiency delivered without small talk. Now it was just Kaler and Vaylor standing near the window. Not close. Not looming. Just present. Back slightly turned. One hand resting loose at his side. Eyes on the city beyond the glass. He hadn't spoken since the corridor. Neither had Kaler. The silence between them wasn't comfortable. It wasn't hostile either. It was the specific silence of 2 people who had unfinished business and no agreement on who should start. Kaler broke it first. Not because he wanted to, because the next contraction was building. He could feel it in the low warning pull across his back, and he refused to let it hit while conversation was still hanging in the air unfinished. You can leave, he said. Vaylor didn't turn around. I'll stay. I didn't ask you to stay. I know. Kaler exhaled slowly through his nose. I don't need. It hit. Hard. No runway, no gentle climb. Just a wall of pressure from his lower spine through his entire middle. And Kaler's hand slammed down on the bed rail, knuckles tight, jaw locked. A sound escaped him. Low. Involuntary. The kind his body made regardless of what his mind wanted. He heard Vaylor move. Not toward the door. Toward him. Kaler didn't look up. Couldn't. He was focused on breathing on the count. 4 in, hold 6 out. On keeping his legs from shaking visibly. And then there was a hand on his back. Not grabbing. Not directing. Just there. Palm flat between his shoulder blades. Still and steady like something anchored. The pressure helped. He hated that it helped. The contraction peaked and rolled back. leaving him damp at the temples and gripping the bed rail with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time. He let go of the rail slowly. Vaylor's hand didn't move. Kaler turned his head and looked at him for the first time since the corridor. Really looked, not the quick glances he'd been rationing. Vaylor was closer than he'd registered. Eye level, crouched slightly, face open in a way that had no performance in it. No agenda visible. No dominance. Just attention. The kind that made Kaler's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with contractions. "How long?" Vaylor asked. "Since the contractions started?" "Maybe 2 hours total." "Since you decided to come alone?" Kaler pulled back slightly. "That's not your question to ask." 8 months, Vaylor said, not answering him, answering himself, like he was doing math out loud. "You had 8 months. And I handled them." "You handled them alone?" "Yes." The word came out harder than Kaler intended. "Alone. Because that was my choice." Vaylor looked at him for a long moment. His hand had finally left Kaler's back. Sometime in the last few seconds, without Kaler noticing exactly when. The absence of it registered more than it should have. "Do you want to know why I'm here?" Vaylor asked. "I know why you're here. You don't." "Power finds what it thinks it owns," Kaler said. Quiet. Even. No venom, just fact. "I've been around enough of it to understand how it works." Something moved across Vaylor's face. Not offense. Not denial. Something closer to grief. "That's not why I'm here," he said. Before Kaler could respond, the door opened. Riven entered, brisk, checking the monitor, adjusting something near the stand. Another staff member followed with equipment Kaler recognized as delivery preparation. It was getting closer, much closer. Vaylor stood, moved back, gave the medical team space without being asked. He crossed to the far side of the room and stayed there, out of the way, out of the team's line of movement, but still inside the door. Still in the room. Kaler watched him from the bed while Riven spoke about dilation and positioning and what the next hour would look like. He registered the medical words. But what he couldn't stop registering was the man across the room who had every reason to take up space, and was choosing not to, who had power over every person in this building, and was using none of it on him. That was the thing nobody had warned him about. Not the power, the restraint. A final contraction rolled through. Longer this time, the kind that meant things were moving fast, and Kaler grabbed the rail and breathed and did not look away from the window. And Vaylor stayed exactly where he was. Not leaving, not speaking, not claiming anything. Just there. "You came alone." The words from the corridor settled differently now. Not anger, not accusation. Something Kaler didn't have a clean word for yet. And that, somehow, was more unsettling than anything else that had happened tonight. He expected control. He expected to be handled. But what Vaylor gave him was something he hadn't prepared for at all. 11 months earlier, the estate sat behind a private road that didn't appear on any map application Kaler had ever used. 3 miles off the main highway, iron gate, camera positioned just high enough that you saw it, and understood that was intentional. The hiring process had been unusual. No agency, no public listing. A number passed through a contact Kaler trusted, because the contact had never given him reason not to. The rate was more than anything he'd made in 2 years combined. The requirements were specific, discretion, schedule flexibility, a willingness to live on-site during engagement. No name provided for the employer, just the address and a time. Kaler took it, not carelessly. He ran the checks he knew how to run, asked the questions that could be asked without flagging desperation, and satisfied himself that the job was real and the risk was manageable. He had done harder work in worse conditions for a fraction of the pay. He arrived on a Wednesday. The estate manager, a composed woman named Arlette, silver hair, clipboard, words measured like she billed by the syllable, walked him through the rules in a single 15-minute orientation. No personal devices in the East Wing. No discussion of the household with outside contacts. No approach to the upper residential level without a direct request. The owner traveled frequently. Kaler likely wouldn't cross paths with him. That was the phrase she used. Likely. Kaler understood that likely was not a guarantee. He filed it and moved on. The work itself was administrative. Managing scheduling for the property staff, coordinating with vendors, handling correspondence that required discretion but not seniority. He was good at it. The kind of good that comes from learning a skill because survival required it, not because it was chosen. For 3 weeks, the estate was simply a job. Then there was the night in the West Library. Kaler had been finishing late. A vendor contract that needed same-night attention. A stack of physical files that couldn't leave the room. Past midnight, the house quiet in the specific way large empty spaces go quiet. Not absence of sound, but presence of it. The kind that made footsteps on hardwood carry differently. He heard someone enter. Didn't look up immediately. The East Wing rule didn't apply here. He assumed staff. You're here late. Not staff. Kaler looked up. The man was in casual clothes, no suit, no performance of authority. Dark shirt, loose at the collar. Standing near the door with a glass of water. Not moving toward him. Face composed. Eyes sharp in the way certain people's eyes were always sharp, regardless of hour or circumstance. Kaler recognized him then, not from a meeting. From a photograph he had seen once, framed in the hallway near the main entrance, the kind of photograph that organizations displayed not for sentiment but for reminder. Valer Drace. Kaler stood. Not from deference, from professionalism. I'm completing the Mercer contract files, he said. Arlette approved the overtime. I know. Valer didn't move from the door. Sit down. Kaler sat. What followed wasn't dramatic and wasn't simple. Valer crossed to the side table, set his glass down, and asked a single question about the Mercer contract. Specific, technical, the kind that told Kaler immediately this wasn't small talk. He answered. Valer listened. Asked a follow-up. Kaler answered that too. For 40 minutes they worked through 3 separate contract issues that Arlette apparently hadn't escalated and Valer had caught on his own review. It was straightforwardly one of the better working conversations Kaler had experienced in years. That was the part that unsettled him later. Not any single moment within it, but the ease. Because Kaler was careful with ease. He had learned early that it was usually borrowed. That warmth extended by someone with power almost always came with interest attached, and the terms weren't disclosed up front. So when the work was finished and the hour was past 1 in the morning and Valer said, I'll have Arlette adjust your schedule tomorrow so you can start later, Kaler said thank you and meant it, and also noted it precisely in the part of himself that tracked these things. It happened twice more over the following 2 weeks. Not pursuit, not pressure, just overlap. The estate was large enough that their paths didn't cross often. When they did, conversation was direct. Never personal. Never anything Kaler could have pointed to and named as inappropriate. But the ease kept returning, and that was the thing Kaler couldn't fully defend against. The night everything shifted wasn't cinematic. It was ordinary in the way that significant moments sometimes are, quiet, accidental in its timing, real in a way that rehearsed moments never manage. A contractor had been let go that day after a records issue. The atmosphere in the house was tense. Kaler had stayed later than planned, again. He was in the back corridor near the kitchen, coat on, ready to leave. Valer came around the corner. They nearly collided. Kaler stepped back. Valer caught his arm, reflex, not intention, the natural catch when 2 people nearly walk into each other. For a moment, neither moved. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds. But 3 seconds was enough for Kaler to understand something he hadn't wanted to understand. He stepped back, said good night, left. He was gone from the estate within 5 days. A quiet departure, professionally handled, notice given, reference provided. No explanation required because the contract was short-term by design. He had told himself it was the right call. He still believed that, but lying in a hospital bed 11 months later, with another contraction building and a man standing across the room who had not spoken in 10 minutes, Kaler ran that night back through his memory with different clarity. Vaylor had known his name before Arlette introduced him. He hadn't registered it at the time. He registered it now. That photograph in the hallway, the one Kaler had used to identify Vaylor that night in the library, it had been moved to that hallway the week Kaler arrived. Arlette had mentioned it offhand once. Mr. Drace asked for some redecorating. Kaler hadn't connected it to anything. He connected it now. He knew. The thought arrived fully formed, not like a conclusion being reached but like a fact being uncovered. Something that had always been true and had simply waited for the right moment to surface. He knew before I ever walked into that hospital. The contraction hit. Kaler breathed through it and didn't look across the room. But he felt Vaylor there. He had always felt him there. That was the part he had never been able to logic away. Kaler told himself he left that estate on his own terms. But some choices we think we're making were already made for us. Were you surprised? Drop a comment. Did you catch the detail about the photograph? There was no announcement, no meeting called, no document signed, no visible moment where authority changed hands and the room was asked to acknowledge it. It happened the way Vaylor Drace did most things. Quietly, completely, and without asking anyone's opinion. Within 20 minutes of their arrival in the private wing, the attending physician had been replaced. Not dismissed, replaced. A different doctor appeared at the door, introduced himself with the specific brand of calm professionalism that came from being someone's first call rather than the hospital's default assignment. He reviewed Kaler's chart, the real one, not the intake screen that had already been cleared, and spoke to him directly, eye contact steady, no glance over his shoulder toward Vaylor. That was the first thing Kaler noticed. The doctor behaved as if Kaler was the patient, which should have been obvious, which should have been automatic. But in the context of everything else happening in this building tonight, it felt deliberate. Like someone had given that instruction specifically. The second thing he noticed was the silence around the room itself. No extra staff lingering in the doorway. No quiet conversations happening just outside the threshold. The hallway beyond the door had gone still in a way that wasn't absence, it was clearance. Like a perimeter had been drawn and everyone with access to this floor understood it without being told twice. Riven was still present. That too felt deliberate. Kaler had clocked the nurse as careful and competent, someone who processed information without broadcasting it. Vaylor had not asked him to leave. In a room where everything else had been adjusted without visible instruction, Riven's continued presence meant something. Dilation is progressing quickly, the doctor said, straightforward. We're looking at 2 to 3 hours, possibly less. I want to monitor the baby's position. There's a reading I'd like to watch. What kind of reading? Kaler asked. Cardiac rhythm. It's not concerning yet. But I want data before I characterize it. Yet. Kaler noted the word. Filed it. I'll need to step out briefly, the doctor continued. A colleague is reviewing remotely. We'll have clarity within the hour. He left. Riven remained near the monitor, adjusting something methodically. Vaylor hadn't moved from the far side of the room since the medical team's arrival. He stood with his back partially to the wall, arms loose at his sides, watching, but not intrusively. The way someone watches when they're responsible for what happens in the room but have made a decision not to take up the center of it. Kaler watched him back. You changed my doctor, he said. Vaylor didn't deny it. The assigned physician had 3 pending oversight reviews. That's not your decision to make. It was made. Kaler held the frustration in his chest and kept his voice level. You rearranged this entire floor in under half an hour. You cleared my intake record. A doctor I never consented to was replaced by one I also never consented to. He paused. You understand how that feels? Vaylor met his eyes. I understand how it looks. Then explain the difference. A pause. Not avoidance, deliberation. Everything that was changed tonight, Vaylor said carefully, was changed to reduce your exposure, not to increase mine. Kaler said nothing. Your record being visible on that intake system, Vaylor continued, meant your name, your status, and your location were accessible to anyone with network clearance at this hospital. That's not a small list. Accessible to who? Vaylor didn't answer that directly. The doctor who was replaced, the reviewing board wasn't about competence. It was about outside contracts. He consults for 3 private medical research firms. Kaler's jaw tightened. You're saying someone could have accessed my chart for reasons that had nothing to do with my care. I'm saying someone already tried. The room went very still. Riven kept his eyes on the monitor. Kaler stared at Vaylor and processed what he'd just heard. Not dramatically, not with visible alarm. Just the slow internal rearrangement of someone who had been operating with incomplete information and was now recalibrating. When? He asked. 40 minutes after your intake was logged. Before I arrived. Who? That's still being confirmed. Kaler looked down at his hands. The monitor beside the bed beeped in its steady rhythm. His child's heartbeat, regular and clear. He thought about the 3 weeks at the estate, the careful departure, the 8 months of managed distance. Every decision he had made with full knowledge and clear reasoning, believing each one was closing a door behind him. The doors hadn't closed. They had just been in rooms he hadn't been watching. I thought I was protecting us, he said, quietly, not to Vaylor specifically, more like a thought that had finally found its way out. Vaylor crossed the room. Not quickly, not crowding. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to matter and far enough to be a choice. You were, he said. You kept both of you hidden for 8 months. That's not nothing. He held Kaler's gaze. But there are things you were hidden from that I wasn't. And you decided that gave you the right to. No. The word came out flat. Certain. It gave me a responsibility, not a right. Kaler looked at him for a long moment. The distinction was small. The distinction was everything. Another contraction moved through him, milder this time, transitional, the kind that meant his body was moving into a new phase. He breathed through it without grabbing the rail. When it passed, he looked back at the monitor. The baby's heartbeat held its rhythm, regular, unaware, and somewhere outside the quiet room, in the hospital's administrative system, in the records that had been pulled and were now actively traced. An access attempt logged at 11:47 p.m. sat in a queue being reviewed by someone Vaylor had called before he'd even entered the building. Kaler didn't know that yet, but he was starting to understand that protection and control were not the same thing, and that one of them, for the first time, didn't feel like a threat. This isn't control. The thought arrived the same way the last one had. Fully formed. Waiting. This is containment. But the question, the one that would keep him awake for the hours still left in this night, was the one he hadn't asked yet. Containment from what? Kaler thought the hospital was safe. But 40 minutes after he walked through those doors, someone had already tried to access his record. Who and why? Vaylor didn't leave. That was the thing. Hours had passed. The doctor had come and gone twice. Riven had rotated out and back in. The city outside the window had gone from dark to the specific pre-dawn gray that belongs to no hour in particular. And Vaylor was still in the room. Not hovering. Not speaking. Not performing concern. Just there. He had moved once. From the wall to the chair near the window. He sat with his forearms on his knees, jacket folded over the chair back, shirt sleeves rolled up 2 turns at the cuff. He was looking at the floor. Kaler had been watching him between contractions. Not continuously. In the spaces, the 10, 12, 15 minutes between waves when his body allowed him to just exist and think. He watched the way Vaylor sat. No phone, no distraction, no quiet murmuring into an earpiece to whoever managed his world at 3 in the morning. Just a man in a chair, in a room, present in the specific way that required nothing from anyone else. Kaler had not been around that kind of stillness in a long time. Maybe never. He thought about the people who had been present in his life during hard moments. Most of them had needed something in return for being there. Reassurance that their presence was working, acknowledgement that their sacrifice was noted, some visible signal that the help was landing. Presence, for most people, came with an invoice. Vaylor asked for nothing. Didn't look up to check if Kaler had noticed him staying. Didn't shift in the chair to signal discomfort or make his patience visible. He simply waited. Kaler had spent 8 months building walls around the logic of leaving. Clean, reasonable walls. Distance was protection. Silence was safety. Involving no one was the only arrangement where no one could be used against him, or use the situation to claim something he hadn't offered. Those walls felt different at 3 in the morning. Not weaker, just smaller. "You haven't slept," Kaler said. Vaylor looked up, not startled, like he had been listening for Kaler's voice the whole time. "Neither have you," he said. "I have a reason." The corner of Vaylor's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more restrained. "So do I," he said. Silence again. Kaler looked at the ceiling. The monitor beeped its quiet rhythm. The baby's heartbeat, consistent, low, occupying the room in the only way that mattered. "You never looked for me," Kaler said. Not an accusation. An observation. Vaylor was quiet for a moment. "I knew where you were." That landed. Kaler turned his head. "Then why?" "Because you left," Vaylor said. Simple. Not defensive. "And you had the right to." The words sat in the air between them, very still. Kaler turned back to the ceiling. He had prepared for anger, for entitlement, for the specific type of authority that expressed itself as wounded ego when it didn't get what it wanted. He had packed arguments in the back of his mind like emergency supplies, responses to the things he expected Vaylor to say. None of those arguments fit here. "I didn't think you'd," he started, then stopped. Didn't finish. Vaylor didn't push him to. Another contraction arrived, lower, longer, the kind that made the next hour very clear. Kaler breathed through it with his eyes closed and both hands on the rail, and when it released he exhaled slow and opened his eyes. Vaylor had moved from the chair. He was standing just behind the rail's edge, close enough to be immediate, far enough to be chosen. His right hand was at his side. He hadn't reached out. Waiting. "Why are you still here?" Kaler asked. The question came out the way it had been sitting. Not hard, not soft. Just real. Vaylor looked at him. Steady. No performance. "Because leaving," he said quietly, "was never something I was going to do." Pause. The monitor beeped. "Even when you didn't ask me to stay." The doctor came back at 4:12 a.m. Not Riven this time. The attending, Dr. Merritt Okafor, the replacement, the one whose presence in this room had been deliberate and specifically arranged. He came in with a tablet, a second physician Kaler hadn't seen before, and the measured energy of someone who had information and had decided exactly how to deliver it. "I want to walk you through what we're seeing," he said. He spoke to Kaler, not to Vaylor, not to the room, directly to Kaler. Tablet angled so only Kaler's view was primary. That, again, felt intentional. "The cardiac rhythm reading I flagged earlier, we've had a specialist review it remotely. The pattern is uncommon. Not dangerous." He paused on that, let it settle. "But uncommon in a very specific way." "How specific?" Kaler asked. Dr. Okafor pulled up a scan on the tablet. A waveform. Clean lines, clear peaks, and a variation in the rhythm pattern that repeated in a cluster every 42 seconds. This sequencing, the doctor said, corresponds to a genetic expression we've only documented in 11 recorded cases across the country over the past 9 years. 11. Not 1100. 11. Kaler stared at the waveform and felt something cold and careful moving through his thinking. Not fear, not yet, just the specific focus that arrived when he understood he was dealing with something that had edges he couldn't see yet. What does it mean for the baby? He asked. Developmentally, nothing adverse. The baby is healthy. Strong, actually. Dr. Okafor glanced briefly at the second physician, who gave a small nod. But this marker, its rarity means it's been studied, tracked, by institutions that are interested in what it could represent medically, and by other parties whose interest is less straightforward. Other parties. Kaler looked up from the tablet. Someone accessed my intake record tonight, he said. The doctor didn't look surprised. Yes. Was it connected to this? A pause that told Kaler the answer before the doctor spoke it. We believe so. The access attempt came through a third-party credentialing system used by 2 of the private research firms I mentioned earlier. Dr. Okafor set the tablet down. Whoever flagged your intake tonight was not looking at your labor notes. They were running a marker search. Kaler was quiet. The monitor kept its rhythm. His child's heartbeat, rare, documented in 11 cases, already being searched for by people who had no right to it, held steady. He thought about the 8 months, the cities, the careful choices, the name he had given the intake nurse without thinking twice because names were public and this was a hospital and there was nothing about a name that should have activated anything. Except the name had connected to a record, and the record had connected to a scan, and the scan had connected to something that people in rooms Kaler had never stood in were already moving toward. He had been protecting the wrong perimeter. Kaler, Valer's voice, quiet, from the far side of the room, where he had stayed through the entire conversation. Kaler turned. I knew about the marker before tonight, Valer said. The room went very still. Dr. Okafor stepped back slightly, not leaving, giving space. When? Kaler asked. Before you left the estate. The timeline rearranged itself. Everything Kaler had filed under coincidence over the last year shifted 1 column to the left. The photograph moved to the hallway the week he arrived. The careful distance Valer had kept. The way the contractor with the records issue had been removed from the estate quickly and completely. The specific terms of Kaler's employment, the access restrictions, the privacy requirements, the on-site living arrangement. Protection structures. Not for the estate. For him. You knew what the baby would be before I did, Kaler said. I suspected. Based on information I had access to that you didn't. And you didn't tell me. You left, Vaylor said. If I had come after you with this, what would that have looked like? Kaler didn't answer, because the honest answer was, like a trap, like a powerful man manufacturing a reason for an Omega to stay close. He would have run faster. The people who accessed your record tonight, Vaylor continued, are connected to a research network that has been trying to locate this genetic expression for 6 years. They don't need the child for medical reasons. They need data, and data in their framework doesn't require consent. That was the cleanest and most terrifying sentence anyone had said in this room tonight. So this was never about me, Kaler said. It was always about you, Vaylor said. You are the parent. You are the one who carried this. You are the one who walked into this building tonight without knowing what it would activate. He held Kaler's gaze across the room. This has always been about protecting you. Both of you. Kaler looked at the waveform still showing on the doctor's tablet. 11 cases. His child was the 12th. And someone had already found them. You were never meant to go unnoticed, Vaylor said. Not as a warning. As the truth that had been following Kaler for 11 months. Finally said out loud. Kaler was quiet for exactly 4 minutes after Dr. Okafor left the room. For minutes of the monitor beeping and the city outside the window shifting from pre-dawn gray to the first suggestion of color, and Vaylor standing near the far wall giving him space that Kaler was starting to recognize as habit rather than strategy. Then he spoke. You made decisions about my life, he said. Without me. Vaylor didn't respond immediately. You structured a job I applied for. You put me in a building you controlled. You knew what my child was going to carry genetically before I had any way of knowing, and you held that. Kaler's voice stayed level. Not raised. That was deliberate. Raised meant losing ground, and he had no ground to lose right now. That's not protection. That's a script I didn't audition for. That's fair, Vaylor said. Kaler blinked. Don't do that. Do what? Agree with me immediately, like you've already thought through every version of this argument and decided which responses de-escalate it fastest. Vaylor was quiet. Then slowly, you're right. That's a habit. I know it is. Another contraction. Harder than the last 3. Transition was close, the body making its final preparations, and Kaler breathed through it without grabbing anything. Hands flat on the bed on either side of him, spine straight. When it passed, he looked at Vaylor directly. I'm not angry because you tried to protect us, he said. I'm angry because you made the choice to do it without giving me the information I needed to make my own. Vaylor stepped away from the wall. Closer. Not to the bed, to the open floor between them. Stopped. If I had told you the night I found out, he said, you would have left faster, gone further. And the people looking for that marker would have found you without me knowing where you were. That was my risk to take. It wasn't only yours. That stopped Kaler. Not because it was wrong. Because it wasn't. The baby didn't choose any of this, Vaylor said. Neither did you. But I had information and resources and I made a call. The only call I could make in that moment that kept both of you in a position I could monitor. Monitor, Kaler repeated. Watch over. A pause. There's a difference. Tell me the difference. Vaylor looked at him steadily. Monitoring keeps something contained for your own use. Watching over means you're prepared to step in front of whatever's coming, and walk away with nothing if that's what's required. Silence. Long. The monitor held its rhythm. You stayed in that chair all night, Kaler said. You haven't made a single decision about this room without someone medical being in the room when you made it. You haven't touched me without me initiating it. He tilted his head slightly. You've been deliberate. Yes. Why? Vaylor held his gaze. Because you needed to see it. Not hear it. See it. Kaler exhaled. The anger didn't disappear. He wasn't built the kind of way where anger disappeared quickly. It was still there, real, valid, rooted in something that wouldn't be resolved by a single conversation in a hospital room at 4 a.m. But it wasn't the only thing there. "You said last night," Kaler said slowly, "that you didn't come because I didn't call you." "Yes." What did that mean? Valer didn't answer right away. He moved to the chair, not the wall, and sat, forearms on knees, the same position he'd held for most of the night, like he was making himself smaller on purpose. "It meant," he said, "that I've known where you were for 8 months. I've had the ability to reach out every single day. And I didn't. Because I left. Because you left. And leaving was your answer." He looked at his hands for a moment. And answers deserve to be respected, even when they cost something. Kaler stared at him. "You stayed away for 8 months, he said. "Because I walked out." "Yes. Even knowing what was at risk. I had people watching from a distance. Your safety was covered. Your choice was covered more." Kaler shook his head slowly. Not in disagreement. In something that didn't have a clean name yet. "You stayed away," he said again, processing it, not repeating it. "I stayed," Valer said quietly. "I just stayed at a distance." Another contraction, this one with a different quality. The kind that made Riven, who had returned silently to the corner of the room some minutes ago, move toward the call button without being asked. Kaler felt it. The shift. Not just physical. He looked at Valer. "I'm not saying we're okay. I know. I'm not saying I trust this. I know that too. But I need you to not leave this room right now." Valer stood. "I wasn't going to," he said. And somewhere in the space between that sentence and the next contraction, between the argument that wasn't finished and the conversation that hadn't started yet, Kaler understood something. He hadn't been pushing Valer away. He had been testing whether Valer would stay anyway. He had stayed. Every time. At 5:47 a.m., everything became very immediate. No build-up. No warning beyond what the body had already been signaling for the last hour. Just the specific, undeniable shift from preparation to arrival, and the room responding to it with the quiet urgency of people who had been ready. Dr. Okafor was at the door within 90 seconds. Riven moved to his station without a word. Valer stepped back to the wall. Same wall, different spot. And watched the medical team take the room in a way that was clean and practiced and required nothing from him except to be still. He was still. Kaler focused. Not on the pain was just the mechanism, the physical cost of what was happening. He focused on the breathing. On the count. On the specific next thing each moment asked of him. He had always operated this way in hard circumstances. Narrow the frame, do the immediate task, expand only when the immediate task was done. Dr. Okafor's voice was steady, instructive without pressure. Riven's presence beside him was the same. They worked in a rhythm that Kaler let himself lean into because leaning in was the only efficient choice left. "You're doing exactly right," Dr. Okafor said at one point. Not hollow reassurance. Clinical confirmation. Kaler received it that way and kept moving. At some point during the final phase, he couldn't have said exactly when. Time had stopped organizing itself into minutes. He became aware of Valer at the edge of his peripheral vision. Still at the wall. Still quiet. But his hands. His hands were no longer loose at his sides. Both of them were pressed flat against the wall behind him. Fingers spread. Like he was physically anchoring himself in place. Like staying still was requiring something from him now. That mattered. Kaler didn't know exactly why it mattered in that moment. But it did. And then, in the specific way that significant moments arrive after enormous effort, it was over. Not loudly. Not with dramatic punctuation. Just a sound. Small. New. The most specific sound in the world. Riven handled the immediate. Dr. Okafor confirmed what needed to be confirmed. Numbers were called out and recorded, and Kaler's own vitals were checked with the same efficiency. And then Riven moved toward Vaylor. Not to say something, to pass something. The baby. Small, wrapped, the monitors already showing a rhythm that matched the waveform on the tablet from 2 hours ago, was placed in Riven's arms first for the standard assessment. And the reading was immediate. The cardiac monitor at the station registered a shift the moment Riven moved toward Vaylor's side of the room. The rhythm, the specific clustered pattern, the one documented in 11 cases, the one that had activated a flag at 11:47 p.m., changed. Calmed. Like something that had been searching for a frequency, had found it. Riven stopped walking. He looked at the monitor, then at Vaylor, then at the monitor again. Vaylor had not touched the baby, had not moved from the wall, had not said a word, but the reading had shifted simply from proximity. Dr. Okafor looked up from his station and met Riven's eyes across the room. Neither of them spoke. Kaler watched all of it from the bed, still catching his breath, processing in the fragments that were the only kind of processing available to him right now. The baby was brought to him. He took the weight carefully, both arms. The warmth of it, specific, immediate, nothing like what he'd imagined even though he'd spent 8 months imagining it. He looked down at the face. Everything else in the room reduced. The monitor, the doctor, Riven at the station, Vaylor at the wall. All of it reduced to peripheral. And then, after a minute, maybe 2, maybe more, Kaler looked up, across the room, at Vaylor, who hadn't moved, who was looking at the baby with an expression that had nothing managed in it. Nothing performed, nothing controlled, just open. The way a person looks when something they've been carefully carrying for a very long time finally arrives safely. "Come here," Kaler said. Vaylor crossed the room, stopped at the bedside, looked down. At the baby first, then at Kaler. "This wasn't an accident," Kaler said quietly. Vaylor looked at him. "The night at the estate. Me ending up here. The marker. All of it." Kaler held his gaze. "You believe that?" "Yes," Vaylor said. Kaler looked back down at the baby. "I'm starting to," he said. That was all. No grand declaration. No resolution of everything that had been said and left unsaid over the last several hours and the last 11 months. Just a beginning. The monitor held its rhythm. Steady. Both of them now. By 7 a.m. the hospital had changed shifts. New staff in the corridors. Morning light through the window, real light now, not the thin gray suggestion of it from before. The city outside had started its day without knowing anything had happened in this room. That felt right. Kaler was sitting up in the bed, the baby against his chest, both of them in the specific quiet that follows enormous effort. Not peaceful exactly. More like the silence after a long conversation, when everything important has been said and what remains is just the fact of two people still being in the same room together. Vaylor was in the chair. Same chair as before. Different now. He was looking at the baby the way people look at things they've waited a long time to see clearly. No agenda in it. No calculation. Just looking. "There's a car," he said after a while. Kaler glanced at him. "When you're ready to leave," Vaylor continued. "Whenever that is. A day, 2 days, a week. There's a car and a residence that has been secured. Not mine. Separate. Yours, your name, your terms. Nothing connected to me on paper unless you decide otherwise." Kaler was quiet. "That's not a condition," Vaylor said. "I'm not offering it in exchange for anything." "Then why?" Vaylor looked at him. "Because the people who accessed your record last night are still operating. And a residence with specific security that I've had prepared for the last 3 months is safer than any alternative right now." 3 months, Kaler said. Vaylor nodded. "You prepared it before tonight. Before I knew you'd come here, yes." Kaler absorbed that. 3 months ago, Vaylor had secured a residence. Not moved into it himself, not connected it to his name, not used it as leverage. Just prepared it, in case. The invoice he had been waiting for never arrived. "I'm not moving in with you," Kaler said. "I know. I'm not agreeing to anything tonight. I'm not asking you to. I need time to think about what any of this means. What I want. What makes sense for the baby and for me separately and together. And I need to make those decisions without pressure." "Yes," Vaylor said simply. "Take the time." Kaler looked down at the baby. The face, still new, still figuring out the mechanics of existing outside the body that had carried it, was quiet, eyes closed, breathing in the small, careful way of someone practicing something for the first time. He thought about the 8 months. He thought about the chair by the window and the hands pressed flat against the wall. He thought about 4 words spoken in the corridor hours ago. "You came alone," and the specific weight that had been underneath them that he hadn't understood until now. Not anger, not possession, something closer to grief. The grief of a person who had known someone was struggling and had been asked, by their own departure, to stay at a distance. "You could have come after me," Kaler said. "Not an accusation, just a fact." "Yes," Vaylor said. "But you didn't." "No. Why not? Really?" Vaylor looked at the window for a moment, then back. "Because love without consent," he said carefully, "isn't love. It's pressure. And you had already been carrying too much of that before me. I wasn't going to add to it." Kaler held the baby a little closer, said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that. Not yet. Not in a way that was fair or finished or honest enough to be worth saying. But it landed. It landed completely. The monitor beeped its last readings. A nurse came in, checked charts, smiled at the baby with uncomplicated warmth, and left. The city outside continued being the city. The shift continued turning. And in a quiet room on the private wing of Mercy Pinnacle Hospital, a man who had arrived alone held something he had protected with everything he had, and for the first time in a very long time, allowed himself to be in a room where someone else was also protecting it. Not instead of him. With him. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. It waits. It prepares a room 3 months in advance and sits in a chair all night and steps back every single time, because it understands that being chosen matters more than being there. Kaler looked at Vaylor one more time across the quiet room. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. But somewhere in the administrative system 3 floors below, in a log that had been quietly running since 11:47 p.m., a second access attempt had just been completed. Not the same credential as the first one. Different system. Different entry point. This one had gotten further. And whoever was on the other end of that access had just pulled one specific piece of data before the trace caught them and closed the connection. The baby's name. The one Kaler had whispered to Riven 20 minutes after the birth. Quiet and certain. The way you say something you've known for a long time. Someone now had it. And in a building across the city. In a room with no windows and 6 screens and people who did not use their real names in that space. A notification appeared. A name, a genetic flag, a hospital location, and a single line at the bottom of the report that read, "Confirmed. Asset located. Awaiting instruction." But what neither Kaler nor Vaylor knew. As the morning light filled the room and the baby breathed and the silence between them finally became something that didn't need to be filled, was that the instruction had already been sent. 3 days ago. They found the baby's name. They already have a location. And the order was sent before tonight even started. This story isn't over. It's just found its real beginning. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel don't just entertain. They stay with you. Drop a comment below and tell us. What one word describes how you feel right now? And if you've ever chosen to love someone quietly, without demanding they choose you back, this one was for you.